Good afternoon, everybody. Next up, we're going to be moving into a deep dive of what is a very interesting sector, both here in the GCC and also in Latin America, and that sector is renewable energy. Thinking about the opportunities that might exist for bidirectional investment and technology transfer in this sector, which has been growing very, very rapidly in recent years, again, both in the GCC and also in Latin America, and certainly an area where we can imagine there might be scope for some interaction and some cooperation and partnership between businesses in the GCC and in Latin America. I'm really pleased today to be joined by two excellent speakers. We cover all bases here. We have Hector Olea, who's the president of Gauss Energia from Mexico, a private sector energy firm involved in investments and financing and actually implementing renewable energy projects in the region. And we also have Dr. Alvaro Lopez-Peña from the International Renewable Energy Agency, which I'm sure you might know is actually headquartered in Abu Dhabi, is the international headquarters for that body, and he's going to be has a great background in policy analysis and what governments are doing and what the regulatory environment is looking like for renewables, not just in Latin America but also globally. So a good combination of private and public sector up here, and a nice mix of sectors and geographies in the audience. So I hope that we have a productive and interesting session, and that there are some lessons for takeaways that we can all have for how we can individually, through our companies and our governments, get involved in this sector, which is absolutely critical for the future, in fact, of the whole world. Hector, maybe if we can start with you. So you're based in Mexico. And Mexico famously had a very closed energy sector for many, many years. And a couple of years ago, the government did some very serious reforms and opened up the sector to competition, both domestic and then also to international investment. And there was huge optimism at the time that this was going to radically change the Mexican energy sector, unlock a lot of new investment, unlock a lot of new energy supply and innovation. What's been your experience? Has that happened?
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Nice to be here. Indeed, in Mexico has been implementing a profound change in the energy sector. I would say it's not only a reform, but a complete revolution in what's happening in the energy sector. If I have to say it with a word, what has been the result of this energy change in Mexico, I would say that is demonopolization. The energy sector has been demonopolized, so private participation now is common ground for everybody vis-a-vis the public sector companies. Especially in the power sector, we see at least three main drivers on how this big reform has been implemented. We have a completely new regulatory and institutional framework. Changing goes starting from the Constitution. We have to enact 21 new laws, regulations. Completely a new regulatory building has been implemented and is now in place. So that would be the first driver on why Mexico is now a place to invest. We have a completely new regulatory system that is very much conducive for private participation. If you add to this big reform that Mexico is a country with a very big natural resources in terms of renewable energy, especially 88% of the territory has an optimal conditions for regeneration in solar power, and nothing to say from here in the Emirates, but in Mexico, 85% of the country has a very good conditions for generate PV solar utility scale projects. Also, you have to consider that in Mexico we have a very, very large market. 95%, 96% of the total population has interconnected to the grid and has electricity and power. And this demand is growing at a pace of 6% annually. So the driver in terms of power demand is growing very much. If you add that also the country has a big energy resources, especially solar and wind, and you add that you also have a very good regulatory system that is being putting in place right now, we have a perfect combination why Mexico right now is very hot to invest in the renewable sector.
And in terms of, that's I guess a positive picture of the macro outlook in terms of, what are the aggregate opportunities. Are there any particular niches where maybe if you were in the energy sector in the UAE where you think it's worth doing some investigation?
Well, certainly solar power has been growing very fast in Mexico. Just to give you an example, there has been 2 auctions already in place, awarded since the energy reform implementation. And within these auctions, that it will, by the way, it will be in place every year. Every year we will have this pipeline of new projects due to the auction process implemented by the independent system operator. In Mexico, due to those 2 auctions, investment opportunities are right now, has been triggered in about $6 billion, only in the main two auctions. $6 billion in new projects that will be implemented in the next 2 to 3 years. And more than half of this investment will come from solar powers. Right now, 4 gigawatts of new capacity will have to be built within the next 2 to 3 years. So it has been a very good activity in the renewable sector with amazing prices. $31 per kilowatt hour is the average price award in contracts during the last auction. So these are very competitive prices that has been taking place because the certainty in doing business in Mexico is there. The track record of Mexico doing business in the energy sector is there, and therefore has been a very good trigger for new investment.
Okay. Thinking back to Mexico's regulatory environment in the macro picture, and I mentioned Donald Trump before in the earlier session, and I can't help but talk about him again, very much top of mind today. So he has has made lots of pronouncements about the US energy sector. So, I guess we might expect perhaps there could be an oil pipeline from Canada, perhaps there might be some trade barriers with Mexico, there might be more domestic oil and gas production, perhaps he'll be more likely to open up Alaska, for example, and certainly will be likely to remove some of the domestic support for renewables in the US. What's the spillover of those policies into Latin America and the energy systems and how they are integrated?
Well, Simon, here you have to differentiate 2 things. The renewable sector in Mexico is very diversified. We have investment from European companies, Japanese companies, Chinese companies, US, Mexican companies are very active in the renewable sector, but very much diversified in that respect. The other side you have to take into account is that conventional generation. And Mexico has made a big bet on conventional generation based on imported gas from the US. $20 billion of a new investment has been invested to extend the pipeline network to interconnect with the US. So there is a very much interconnection business going on, physical interconnection with pipelines with the US, but more in the conventional sector. So how that's going to play that conventional development, conventional power development is going to work vis-a-vis the importation of more than half of the consumption of natural gas from the US. That's going to be a very interesting card to look into the future.
All right, okay. And actually, later on, I'd like to come back to the point you made about the economics of renewables, but we might just make a segue off to Alvaro and talk a little bit about the policy environment, both internationally and in Latin America. I know you've recently, with the International Renewable Energy Agency, done a big report looking at the state of renewables in Latin America. Could you maybe tell us what are your top-line findings? What are the implications of your research?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Simon. Thank you very much for the organizers. Good afternoon, everyone. Indeed, as Simon was saying, we have been working in a market analysis of renewable energy for Latin America, which we actually published yesterday. We launched it yesterday in Santiago, Chile. And basically, I would like to just tell you a bit of the key messages of this report that we have been working on. First of all, as you all know very well, Latin America has some of the key oil exporters. Countries such as Mexico, for example, Venezuela, have been very large fossil fuel countries. But at the same time, there's also a lot of renewables in Latin America. Just to give you an idea, 25% of the energy mix in Latin America is supplied with renewables, mainly bioenergy and hydropower. That is twice the global average. So Latin America uses 2 times more renewables than the rest of the world. What we have seen lately is that, as I said before, these renewables have been mainly bioenergy and hydropower, and have been mainly focused in a few countries such as Brazil, that, as you know, has a lot of hydropower and also a lot of bioenergy. What we're seeing in the last 3-4 years in our report is that these trends are clearly diversifying. There's more markets coming into the picture. It's not only a Brazil-only game anymore. We have big countries such as Mexico. We have the case of Chile, Uruguay. Also now it seems Argentina is coming into the picture, that are becoming really big renewable energy markets. Just to give a fact that I find very interesting, last year, total investment on renewable energy in Latin America was around $16 billion, focused mainly in Brazil, in Mexico, in Chile, and in Uruguay. And of those 4 countries, 3, Brazil, Mexico, and Chile, are among the 10 top countries in the world in renewable energy. So out of the 10 bigger investors in the world in renewable energy, 3 are in Latin America. So the region is really seeing a lot of things happening with solar and wind. So as I said, it's not only a Brazil-only game, it's also other markets, and also it's not only bioenergy and hydropower anymore. We see a lot of wind coming up in countries such as Brazil, in countries such as Mexico, in countries such as Uruguay, and also more recently solar, as Hector just said. What are the main drivers of this? Well, first of all, we believe it's an energy security driver. Latin America, as you know, has been very reliant on oil and gas, which many countries are importing because of the increased demand, but also hydropower. And this poses important energy security risks. For example, as you know, in Brazil, they were having a hard time with the Olympics because hydro generation was very low and the price of electricity went up quite a bit. So climate change is causing droughts, and those droughts are causing energy security problems in Latin America. And this is an important driver. Also, the cost of renewable energy, as Hector just mentioned. I mean, renewables are today neck to neck competing with conventional sources of energy, such as gas. And as Hector mentioned, in the recent auctions in Mexico, there were open auctions, so gas was competing with solar, and still it was solar that won. So the decrease in cost, that has been spectacular. Just to give you an idea, the cost of PV panels has fallen 80% in the last 4 or 5 years. So it's something really spectacular. And then also, as we said, it's also, we don't find it necessarily a matter of environmental policy, but also a matter of economic policy. We are seeing also in IRENA, we're analyzing more and more the employment, macroeconomic implications and employment implications of renewables, and we can see that it's clearly a positive picture. I can also tell you maybe a bit later more about the investment trends that we have found in the report, and also a bit the capital trends. Where is the money coming from, and how is that capital flow mix evolving, and how it should evolve in the future.
Okay. I'm wondering about the international policy environment for for renewables. So, and again, my favorite topic, Donald Trump being elected today. Now, he has said he's going to take the US out of the recently negotiated Paris climate change agreement, as well as reducing a whole lot of domestic support for renewables. I mean, and we've also just come out of really sort of a 5-year period, especially post the Copenhagen conference a few years ago, where basically nothing has been happening on the international stage in terms of commitments to reduce CO2 emissions or international coordination. Are we sort of facing another lost decade of no progress?
Well, you're asking an excellent question. I don't have the answer, unfortunately, because we only know that Trump won since a few hours ago. It is not good news, I agree with you, but I think at the same time that the picture of renewable energy is very significantly related to climate change, for sure, I agree, but as we have been saying, it's not only about climate change, it's also about economics, it's also about industrial development, it's also about diversification of energy sources. So I think that's one thing, I agree, and then also I believe that the US, let's see what happens in the US. As you may know, also the latest fiscal incentives have been approved. I think it was like a year ago, less than a year ago, and those fiscal incentives are there until I believe 2018 or 2019. So still, Trump is not. I don't think he will manage to change. I mean, energy policy is not something that you can change from night to day, right? It takes time. So certainly it's good news, but let's wait and see what happens. Having said that, I don't think that this should affect too much in Latin America, because the drivers in Latin America, I mean, Latin America is deploying renewable energy not because the US is deploying renewable energy. They have their own reasons. So I think that, of course, it's not good news, but we have to wait and see.
Okay.
I totally agree with Alvaro in terms that the gain in renewables is moving through our sustainable targets coming from this agreement, this sustainability agreements in Paris and so on. But now what we've seen in the latest years and how the technology has been improving is that renewable energy doesn't require any longer at this point in time big targets or big mandates to move along. The economics of the renewable energy is driving the process by market conditions, and that's a big change, a game changer in how the renewables are going to progress, not only in Latin America, but I believe in the rest of the world. So once the renewable technology is being very much competitive, like the case in wind and solar, we're going to see those targets moving along, not because this is enforced due to agreements, sustainability agreements, but just because it makes sense economically, and that's a big change. Just to give you an example, in Mexico we set a target of 35% renewable component in the overall power generation matrix by 2025. We believe we're going to achieve that target by 2021 at most. So right now we have to review, and I don't know if the government is already looking into that, but as an industry in Mexico, we're already looking into rethink those targets, because we're going to have much more renewable in the system as previously before planned.
Okay. I've got a follow-up question for you, but I'd just like to remind the audience, if you want to send in any questions through the app, again, they'll appear up on my screen here, and happy to bring them in, or you can also just walk up to the microphones, and if I see you, I'll come to you. There is a question down here, front in the middle. Is that right? I'll just ask them something. If you wander over, then we can take it. Just before the question from the audience, so you're saying that renewables aren't really relying on policy anymore. They're just competitive in their own rights. So we're here, in the world's preeminent sort of oil and gas production region. I mean, this is terrible news for the GCC, isn't it? I mean, even when hydrocarbon prices are so low, you're saying that renewables are still competitive just on their own terms, even if there's no policy support. I mean, does that mean that countries in this region, have to be ready to have completely uncompetitive exports?
Let me go again to Mexico and what the evidence is showing. The latest auction in Mexico that was resolved last September, the average price for power, PV power, solar power, was $31 per kilowatt hour, 31. The same price for conventional power on combined cycle gas generation with natural gas as a fuel was 39. So right there we see that solar power is very much competitive vis-a-vis combined cycle. Does that mean we only have renewable energy? I don't think so. But we're going to have a more balanced mixture and diversified mixture of different technologies working into each country. But what we are already seeing is that renewables is getting very much competitive vis-a-vis conventional at this point in time, where the prices of gas, at least in Mexico, are very low.
Right.
Very low.
I also would like to comment on this, on the point you made about this region, about the GCC. Of course, we all know that they're big oil exporters, right? But at the same time, I believe that the story of diversification of the economy is a story that has been in this region for many years. They are very well aware that if they deploy more renewables here, they can export more fossil fuels. We have to keep in mind that the UAE imports gas, exports oil but imports gas for electricity generation, and the demand of electricity is growing very, very fast. Mm-hmm. And also we have to keep in mind that there's a very strong leadership coming from this region, and we have the case of Dubai, where we're in today, with their objectives for 2020, but also for 2050. So really this region is also thinking ahead of many other regions and is showing the path as well.
Okay, so a more optimistic picture than I was painting. We have a question from the audience.
Hello, my name is Juan Maquena. I'm a lawyer from Chile, and where I head the energy practice at Chile's largest law firm. Two questions. One is in connection with basically technology. We recently heard the CEOs of Shell and Total saying that investors in renewable energy companies shouldn't expect too much return on their investment. And this is somehow backed up by the fact that recently we saw large companies like Abengoa from Spain and San Edison from the US going into insolvency problems. That is a question for both of you. And the second one is for Dr. Lopez-Peña, which is regarding the future of batteries. Renewable energy costs have been going down dramatically, and we expect that battery costs are going down dramatically as well. I come from Chile, where we have a lot of lithium, and we expect that as renewables are going to replace base load, basically, and thermal power production, you need to have storage capacity in our country. So those are the two questions. Thank you.
Financing and storage, two critical things when we come to renewables. Maybe if we start on storage,
Sure.
Alvaro.
Sure. So that's an excellent question indeed. Of course, we all know that in order to have more renewables, you need a more flexible power system, and part of that flexibility includes storage. But not only storage, also we have interconnections, and as you may know, for example, there's some momentum being built in the CINEA, in the interconnection in the Andean region, for example. So of course, if you have a copper plate, if you have a more interconnected power system, there's a reduction in the needs for storage. Having said that, we believe also, as you noted, that the technology improvement in batteries is incredible. What's happening with batteries, like it's happening with PV, no? I mean, to people that don't understand this sector, I always use the example that it's happening the same with PV and with batteries as years ago happened with mobile phones or with computers. No, the technology is advancing so fast that we can really see a revolution. So that's a bit the answer to your second question. On the first question, I saw the news of what you were mentioning about the returns. I think that much of the revolution of renewable energy is not going to come from big companies. And we see the example of Europe, right? How it's all about distributed generation, people installing solar panels in the roofs, and all of this. And that revolution is challenging the actual big utilities and the big companies, as we have seen, for example, in Europe, where you have companies such as RWE or the big electric utilities in Europe that have been companies that year after year for 60 years have made profits and are posting losses now. So I think there's a revolution going on. Of course, it is not going to take 2 days. These are things that take time. But I think that companies are adapting and are seeing it.
Hector, what's your view on the financing
I think very good questions, and let me address both of them because it's very important to have the storage picture inside this story. Similar to PV solar, storage is a disruptive industry, and it's going to change the way utilities and the way we're going to do business in the future with respect to power generation. But this is not the future that we're thinking in 10 years, 20 years. This is the future for the next 2 to 3 years. Storage, commercial storage for utility scale projects are going to be viable within 2 to 3 years. And that's going to change a lot the things that we're going to look into this diversification. Because issues like integration and intermittency, which was the big question for PV, solar, and wind, are going to vanish, are going to go away. And how are we going to play this game, storage, renewables, and conventional, is going to be very interesting. But that's a game is going to be played in the very near future. With respect to the financiability of projects, I think governments and utilities and the development industry, the development sector industry, has to be very aware on the bankability issue. I mean, project has to be bankable. And therefore financiable and long-term bankable. But whether that bankability guarantees sufficient returns, that's a question mark. Mm-hmm. And that's not secure. And companies like Abengoa and SunPower, I don't want to judge them, but if you're not responsible, you're going to lose money. And that's not a sustainable scenario. So as long as that is just case by case and happen case by case, well, we're in good shape, and companies comes and goes, and we know that in the private sector. But I don't see that return issue being a generalized cause or generalized problem. There are going to be some casualties, yes. Projects are going to be built, some of them are not going to be built, depending how companies play those cards. But I think what is important is that the regime, the regulatory regime, and the business industry, the development business industry, is that projects are bankable. You can finance those projects on a long-term basis, which is the key element for any infrastructure. As long as that happens, we're in good shape. Whether that's going to guarantee returns, nothing is guaranteed, as we have seen it just today.
Okay, right.
Exactly.
And
sorry, Simon,
yeah.
I would like to add one more point, if you allow me, on the storage issue,
sure.
Because I forgot to add it before. We have to keep in mind that there's a lot of storage in Latin America. It's not called batteries, it's called hydropower. And you have big countries such as Brazil, such as Uruguay, and also there's hydropower in Chile, of course, that are already exploiting in a very, very, very smart way the already installed hydropower to balance and to basically integrate variable renewables in a much more efficient way.
And just, if there's any final questions from the audience, do walk up to a mic or send them up. But otherwise, I'd like to close by asking about the role for foreign investors. What specifically is the need for foreign investment in this sector? Is it about supply of capital? Is it about know-how? Is it about technology sharing or something else?
Well, I guess you have a role. When you develop an energy project, there are different roles. There are the investment role, there are development role, there is the EPC building role, there are the engineering, procurement, construction
Okay.
role. There is the financier. So you have different roles. What is important is that whatever role is you're taking part of is done in equal terms, in a play field, in a steady play field, and there is no advantages to be national, to be domestic, or to be international player. As the way it is in Mexico, for instance, we have a very plain field where everybody can participate in these different roles in any capacity they want, without any discrimination, without any other difference to be national or to be foreign investors. So that's what is important, and I believe in across Latin America, and that's the way. It's very open to participate in these projects in any capacity you like, either as a financier, as an equity player, as a developer, as a construction company, whatever, or as a supply of main equipment. Mm-hmm. In Mexico, the participation of all these different roles are filled with very diverse in terms of nationalities that are converging into a regime that is very open and very conducive to business whatsoever, international or national.
Okay. Yeah. And Alvaro, any final thoughts on the role for foreign investors in this sector?
Sure. I mean, one thing, and I think Hector also mentioned it before, one key bottleneck that we see is the development of bankable projects, no? And the development, having a healthy pipeline of projects to finance in Latin America. So I do believe that, that developers that are active in this region, and there's a lot of them because, as you know, especially in the solar sector, there's a lot of things happening in this region. So I think many of these developers could certainly look at Latin America and at project development in Latin America as an option. So I agree on the project development side, there's a big business opportunity, but also there's a big business opportunity on the investment, on providing debt and equity to projects. Just to give a brief, also a finding from our report, we have found that most of the debt financing that is happening in Latin America for renewables is coming from public financing institutions, either national financing institutions or international financial institutions. You have big guys, big players like BNDES, the National Development Bank in Brazil, and also NAFIN in Mexico, that are providing a lot of money, that are providing a big share of the debt for these projects, because basically they are able to provide this debt at lower interest rates and higher tenors than the market, in exchange, of course, for some broader political goals, such as development of domestic industries or development. So, of course, there's a big space for private money to come into the picture, no? And here in this region, we have big investment funds, big wealth sovereign funds that are looking at Latin America and are looking at renewables because, of course, it's a way of investing in the long term, securing. If you get good projects that have secure PPAs backed with sovereign warranties and with good warranties, where the risk is low, where much of it is in US dollars. Let's keep in mind that many of the contracts in Latin America are being signed in US dollars, and the region here, the dirham is also pegged to the US dollar, so the currency exchange, for example, could be limited, not so difficulty in that case. So certainly there's a lot of need for private money into the renewable energy sector that could come into the picture in Latin America, and much of it could come from this region.
And the important part for investors and anyone who wants to participate in this market is that things have happened not one time or two times, but it's important to have a sequence or have the expectations that a pipeline of projects are going to be continued for a number of years. That's why you're making an investment to go down and to open up an office and to open up a private concern and to participate in those markets, because you have the expectation that is going to be constantly generation of projects or opportunities to be invested. So it's not one time and that's it, or two times, but it's a constant movement or engine of projects that guarantee that the party is going to be there for a number of years.
Right. So it's the importance of taking a long-term view, which I think think, as we know, is something that the UAE and Dubai in particular has a good track record in doing it, in planning for the longer term. So certainly a way of thinking that's going to be useful in the renewable energy sector. Just before we close off into the break, I just wanted to share a few sort of thoughts from gathering together all the discussions that we've had so far today about where is Latin America, where is it going, and what are the implications therefore for the links between this region and for Latin America. I think it's fair to say at the moment that Latin America is at something of a turning point, and this is from a couple of perspectives. One, of course, is commodities and commodity prices. So certainly my view and the view of the Economist Intelligence Unit is that most commodity prices have now reached their bottom, and the overall trend should be up over the next 2 years. That's going to have a big impact on Latin America and be a big economic change. Related to that, on the economic side, we've just had a couple of years where the region's biggest economy, Brazil, has been in recession. We're expecting that to not be the case next year, so Brazil going back into growth next year. And in fact, that turnaround in Brazil, Latin America's largest economy, is going to be one of the biggest contributors to global growth in 2017. It's going to more than offset the further slowdown in China. So from a global perspective, 2017 does have some interesting things happening in Latin America. At the same time, there's some important political transitions. We have the opening up in Cuba, the opening up in Argentina, a new regime coming on board in Brazil, and of course, still ongoing turmoil in Venezuela. Not clear exactly where that ends, but certainly it's likely that there's going to be a lot of change and a lot of flux in that significant economy over the next couple of years. At the moment, because of geography and other reasons, there are maybe the links between the GCC and Latin America are not that deep as of today. But I think we have heard today that there is something of an appetite for an increase in the level of mutual understanding, for learning about each other, and then some interest in some of the sectors where there is potentially some collaboration to be had. We just heard about renewables. Earlier in the day, there was an opportunity discussed around cities and infrastructure, financing and investment, all areas where the GCC and Dubai in particular has an advantage. We already know that Latin America is an important partner for this region in terms of food, and it's not just export of raw materials. There's some quite sophisticated integration along the supply chain, sometimes at the level of feedstock or of semi-finished products or sometimes final products. We had this morning an interesting intervention from Incentiv Fox, the previous president of Mexico, and I'd just like to remind you in the context of all the political developments of today, we're really looking forward to his session tomorrow, where he will be presenting his opinion, and as you will have heard, he certainly doesn't hold back. We can expect a very forthright and blunt and probably entertaining take on Latin American politics and how that fits into the new global situation tomorrow. So that's certainly something that, well, I'm very much looking forward to it, and I hope you are as well. Just for the rest of today, so we have a short break now where we'll have some refreshments, and then we're going to move into 2 roundtables. They'll be over there, but people out the front will direct you to it. We have two roundtable sessions going on. One will be focused on Latin America, so that's the one to go to if you're interested in learning more about the region, how to do business there, what is the culture like, what are the regulations like, how do you go about doing things. Then there's also going to be a separate session focusing on this region, so perhaps for those of you who have come from Latin America who don't need us to tell you about your own region, but you'd like to learn more about the GCC and maybe the global context, we'll also have a session there, and we have some great local experts with many decades of experience between them, talking both about Latin America and then also about the GCC picture and the global picture. So 2 options there for the roundtables this afternoon. And because we've got such a wonderful location here overlooking the Persian Gulf on the Palm, at the end of that roundtable, there's going to be some refreshments and some traditional Emirati performances outside on the terrace. So that'll be a lovely sunset activity before we come back in here for the gala dinner. So that's just what's coming up for the rest of the day. So we can go and grab grab a coffee and then get ready for the afternoon's roundtables. But in the meantime, please thank my two speakers, Hector Olea and Alvaro Lopez-Peña. Thanks very much.